And of course, always excited to share with Africans the latest concerning Nigeria's forthcoming elections. Thanks for, of course, those very interesting stories. And of course, every morning, sometime around the 8 o'clock hour on Breakfast Central, we pause and put spotlight on Africa's most populous nation, Nigeria, as she heads to the polls in just 7 days. Isn't it amazing how time flies? It is 7 days to go already, and guess who? Just guess who the most popular name and face that seems to be in the middle of Nigeria's election is. No, he's not one of the candidates. No, he's not a leader of any party. No, he is not in any way, running for presidency or on the edges of any party. But can you guess who that person is? I'll tell you. If you guess this particular name or this particular face, Godwin Emefiele, that's the person we're talking about. Yes, that's him. He is the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria and has been in the middle of the election storm. Just yesterday, the decision to have the old 200 naira notes in circulation along with the new, new notes got the nod of the opposition party, the PDP. Remember, yesterday morning we made shared with you a national broadcast by Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari where he made that declaration. Well, let's listen quickly to the Central Bank of Nigeria governor.
Illicit financial flows. The truth is this, we are all servants. We are serving Nigerians. As far as I'm concerned, the Honorable Attorney General of the Federation has spoken on this matter, and the President has sealed the whole of the issues this morning in his broadcast. And I think I can only just appeal to Nigerians, let's allow this policy to work. This policy is one policy that goes to solve the problem of reducing corruption and illicit financial flows. This policy goes to resolve some of the problems in the economy. This problem also goes to reducing the level of insecurity in the country. So these three issues, which are the tripod of this administration's policy, are all embedded in this policy. We should just allow it to work. We keep saying this. There are some temporary pains, but I can assure Nigerians that the long-run benefit to Nigeria is overwhelming, and we should just give it a chance to work. The President has given his directives. I have met with about 15 banks this morning later, and we've given them directives about how they should make all the old 200 naira notes available.
Well, there you have it, the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria sharing his views after the presidential speech yesterday morning. But the big question really is, who should the CBN governor listen to? Should he listen to the president, or should we work with the Supreme Court ruling that has, of course, called for an extension? Who exactly holds more power or should be able to give Nigerians proper direction? Bear in mind that the Minister of Finance has not been mentioned in any of these conversations. None, not one of them. It almost feels like Nigeria currently doesn't have a Minister of Finance. But hey, welcome to Election Countdown Nigeria. I am Osaogi Ogbawa, and our discussion today will focus on a new report that will affect you and the elections. Stay with us. Welcome back. A new survey has been carried out by civic tech organizations EIE Nigeria and SBM Intelligence. The survey has led to the call on Nigerian electorates to show significant interest in all levels of elections in the country, and not just one, which is, of course, the presidential elections. It makes 90% of the conversations. Nobody talks about the other elections. The group has reminded Nigerians that all the elections play a crucial role in determining the quality of life within the communities. Now, we share with you, of course, some of the findings by EIE and SBM with a few graphics that we're going to be putting on your screen now. Yes, it shows there that the presidential elections, Nigerians, of course, are talking about 100% of the presidential elections. Nobody seems to be bothered much with any other thing. The governorship elections make 34.53% of the conversations or level of interest. The, of course, Senate elections make 19.86% of the conversations, and of course 16.75% to the House of Representatives. State House of Assembly about 14.24%. Many and more citizens rather focus on the presidential elections owing to the power arrogated to the center by the 1999 constitutions. And of course, it's a reminder by these groups, these research groups, that citizens must recognize the significance of these other levels of elections because they play a crucial role in determining the quality of life within their communities. And it's a very, very important reminder to Nigerians. Regardless of how many times you have conversations on presidential elections, you still will have a governor. You still will have members of your state national assembly, state House of Assembly. You still have members of the National Assembly, both the Senate and the House of Reps. You still will have, of course, on the local government level, you still have local government chairmen. We're joined this morning by Cheta Nwanze, his lead partner, SBM Intelligence. Good morning, Mr. Nwanze. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Mr. Swoya.
All right, good to see you. Now, let's get into this, and understand exactly what's playing out here. Why do Nigerians place this level of importance on the presidential elections and completely ignore that there are still governorship elections, state House of Assembly elections, and, of course, National Assembly elections?
Thanks for having me. It's a tragic holdover of military rule. In 1966, the regime of Nwanze centralized the country heavily, and since then, the subsequent military government centralized the country further and further. So, as a result, we've come to a point where everything is routed through Abuja, even though on paper there's a lot that the state governments and the local governments are responsible for. But in our minds, our own minds as a people, have been wired to look towards the center for everything. So as a result of that, we tend to ignore what is happening at the more local levels, the levels of the country that paradoxically are closer to the people, forgetting that those are very important. So for example, let's take something like basic education, which is squarely in the prerogative of the states and the local governments, or healthcare. The truth is that because those are in the prerogatives of state governments, in the purview of state governments and local governments, and we don't pay attention to them, by the time most Nigerian students get to the university level, which is under the federal government for the most part, they're already damaged. There's not much you can do with those raw materials. Things like local sanitation, packing of rubbish from the front of my compound. I can't expect Buhari to come out to be responsible for something like that. It is something that is within the purview of the local governments. But then again, the state governors have done a lot in the past 20 years to decapitate the local governments. And all of that has happened without Nigerians noticing, simply because we spend so much time focused on Abuja. And this is something that this survey that we conducted, which we are publishing later today, has brought out for everybody to see. The fact that Nigerians are completely enamored by the federal government and forget about the local levels. I mean, when you have a situation where of all the respondents, a third of the respondents knew anything about the governorship races, a fifth were interested in the Senate races, a sixth in the House of Representatives races, and then a seventh in the State House of Assembly races. It tells you a lot about where the problems are. And if local government elections were happening along with the general elections, I'm willing to bet a lot of money that it would have even been a smaller percentage of respondents that would have been interested in that.
All right, Cheta, another thing, I would also like to ask is, with regards, for people who would argue that the local government and the state governments and the state houses of assembly, have really just been rubber stamps, for a long time. And so the people they failed the people so much that the people have really completely forgotten of their relevance, and that's why they barely remember them when it's time for elections. Would you agree with that perspective? But would of course get you to share on that. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll have you speak a little bit about that this morning on Election Countdown Nigeria. Welcome once again to Election Countdown Nigeria. The conversations continue here. We are asking, why do Nigerians pay less attention to other electoral processes aside the presidential? You barely hear conversations about the state houses of assembly or even the National Assembly elections. Everyone's focused on the presidency. And this morning we're speaking with Cheta Nwanze. So welcome back once again. Now let's get you to share that. Have these other levels of government failed the people so badly that Nigerians generally do not just remember of their relevance when it's time to vote?
So it's a paradox actually. The failure of the lower levels, the down ballot levels of government, is as a result of the overbearing nature of the federal government, and it has become a vicious cycle essentially. What we need to do is find a way to break that cycle, and the cycle has to be broken very publicly. So in legal terms, Nigeria has something called an exclusive legislative list in the Constitution. It's a group of 68, is it 58 or 68 items that the federal government has
full authority on oversight, yeah, okay.
As compared to the lower levels. Now, when you have something like stamp duty or the registration of births and deaths, things as mundane as that, because both are on the exclusive legislative list. When you have things as mundane as that in the hands of the federal government, it tells you where the problem is. The problem starts in the Constitution. We need to reduce those things. We need to reduce the amount of responsibilities that the federal government has. And interestingly, that's something that has happened in many respects during the Buhari government. I think a lot of people know that I don't have too many good things to say about the Buhari government, but I will admit that under the Buhari government, there's a lot that has shifted from the federal government, at least to the state governments, if not necessarily to the local governments. But something that has not happened accompanying that is proper advocacy, publicity, so that people will know that these little things have shifted from here to here.
Yeah.
So because of that lack of information filtering through, it means that in the minds of people, so for example, negotiations in the education sector, a lot of it is now more, or should now be more led by the state governments. But you still have the National Union of Teachers as a federal body. It shouldn't be. Yeah. So because of those kind of things, or you have the resident doctors, again, those should be negotiating with state governments nowadays. But everything is still done centrally. So while some things have shifted, the minds of Nigerians haven't shifted as much. And it's not the fault of Nigerians. It's the lack of information.
Yeah. So now I also want to, get you to speak on the damage this has done with regards governance, in the last, let's say 20, 30 years in Nigeria, or maybe let's say since 1999. How much damage has this level of ignorance?
Even beyond that.
Okay, well, feel free to go beyond. How much damage has this, done to Nigerians and to governance? And listen, every 4 years or every 8 years, you hear of a governor who just finished his tenure as governor, but, runs to the Senate to retire, and of course remains in the Senate as long as possible before he's eventually maybe made minister by some other government later in the future. The lack of focus on who takes over office in the Nigerian National Assembly has made this possible, because I'm sure, Cheta Nwanze, you are familiar with certain governors in the southeastern part of Nigeria today that will be wanting to go to the Senate, that have no business being in the Senate. But because we've paid so little attention to things like this, that's why it's possible. So I want you to share with me, what are the level of damage that this has caused?
Those stars bites me. Okay, you want me to call names? No, the truth is that Ikpeazu and Umahi, in reality, should have no business going to the Senate. There's nothing in either man's track record that suggests that either of them will be a good senator representing Abia South or Ebonyi Central either. And that is part of the problem, because of the lack of interest, because people just tend to go into the election and then press their thumbs in the same pattern throughout.
Yes.
Although a brief preview of the survey that we're publishing later today, an increased number of people than usual, a higher number of people than usual, have said that they'll be voting for different parties at the presidential and at down ballot levels. Having said that, the pattern is typically that people just vote for the same party all through for the elections that they bother to turn up for. And another pattern that has always emerged, which is going to hold, is that the turnout is going to be higher at the presidential election than at the governorship elections. I think that one thing that we should start having serious conversations about is about having all the general elections on the same day. A single day in which you have all the presidential, national legislative, state government, and state legislative elections. But I think there are so many things that have failed. So let's take your industry, for example. In properly functioning countries, there's something called local news, which is something that we don't have so much of in Nigeria. So for example, you don't have in Lagos something that, like, say, the Festac Review. So someone who lives in Festac does not necessarily, unless he decides to be plugged into his area, he does not necessarily know what is happening around him. And as a result of the fact that he does not know what is happening around him, he may not even know that he lives in a ward of a local government area. So you have those paradoxes here and there. Now, one of the problems of over-centralization, or the kind of over-centralization that we have, which is unitary, is the fact that Nigeria is a very big and very diverse country. And as a result of that, it is simply impossible to run the country in the same manner that you run it in Zamfara and in Akwa Ibom, or in Borno and Lagos. You just can't. But we have been trying to do that, and it shows up in our institutional responses to economic issues. So, for example, the idea of trying to have the same petrol prices throughout the country, from Lagos to Maiduguri, or from Gusau to Uyo, it flies in the face of economics, because there is a cost, given that we import petrol. There's a cost to shipping that petrol, to moving that petrol from the single point of importation, which happens to be in Lagos, all the way to Maiduguri. So if you don't factor in that cost into the final pump price, instead you end up paying something, it leads to wastage. And that is, it's a single or a very good example of how we fail as a country. Failure of basic economics, over-centralization, which leads to wastage, which leads to reduced productivity, which leads to where we are. Yeah. So that's it. That's a very good example. And like I said, it started way beyond, or way before, the transition to democracy in 1999. The problem now is that we haven't, as a people, we talk about restructuring, we make a lot of noise about restructuring, but we haven't, as a people, moved our minds from that over-centralization. The fact of the matter is that Nigerians, and have come to painfully accept that, especially after looking at the data from this survey, Nigerians still want a heavily centralized government. And I think the real work for civil society organizations over the next 4 years or whatever period is to actually campaign, do a lot of advocacy to shift the mindset of Nigerians, so that Nigerians will understand and will begin to demand more from those at the local level. One thing that people need to understand is that the legitimacy of a government, take, for example, the Lagos State Senate by-election from 2 years ago now, it was turnout was 10%. When you have turnout of 10%, that person doesn't represent you. He doesn't have legitimacy. But the converse part of that conversation is this: if he doesn't have legitimacy, if he doesn't represent you, then you cannot make demands of him.
Very true. But Cheta, we have a few minutes before we, of course, have to wrap up. But I want you to speak on the forthcoming elections. You already mentioned that, from your research, there's more and more people who are voting across different parties now. But we've also heard, people from different parties say, or their presidential candidates basically say, vote me, vote this person for governor here, vote this party for, basically telling Nigerians to vote the same political party all the way down. How do you think it would play out this time, from your research? Can you expand a little bit more on how you think it will play out this time? Do you think people are very interested in changing? Because I know there's a big battle against the two major parties in Nigeria from the Nigerian citizens, the electorate. So do you think that they might be making a mistake if they decide that they're going to vote, okay, this new third force, in quotes, all the way down?
Well, doing that will be a mistake. I think that one of the things so let us assume that the electorate decides to vote for Peter Obi of the Labour Party. It will actually be in the electorate's interests to have maybe the APC, although I don't see much of a future for the APC as a party. It will be in the electorate's interest to have the APC dominate one house of the National Assembly and the PDP dominate another house. And why is this? Because it will create a tension that will force people in government to learn to talk to each other and to reach compromise. Maybe that is the best outcome. And a sneak preview of the survey data that we're publishing later today, that looks like a likely outcome, or it's one possible outcome. One house of the National Assembly dominated by one party, another house dominated by another party, and the presidency with a third party. It's a very strong possibility. The question will then become, can we learn how to make the necessary compromises for the country to move forward after that? Yeah. But that aside, the key thing is that people need to learn to start getting more involved in governance issues in their locality. And locality here does not mean what do we call it, state of origin. It means residence, where you live, because that's what matters.
All right, Cheta, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll have you speak on other things, which may include, of course, the confusion with regards to Naira policy with the Central Bank of Nigeria, the president, the Kaduna State governor. What seems to be going on with the APC seems like an implosion at this point, and other things this morning with the time that we have left. Stay with us on Election Countdown Nigeria. We'll be back. Welcome once again to Election Countdown Nigeria. Our guest is the lead partner at SBM Intelligence, Cheta Nwanze. And of course, the conversations, started, with the survey that was carried out by EIE and SBM Intelligence, showing that Nigerians focus more, just a fraction, about 20% of Nigerians that focus on other elections in the country aside the presidential elections. And basically we're expressing why this is dangerous for governance and, of course, for demanding a better nation. Cheta, let's bring you in on other issues that have, of course, been trending in the last 24 hours. I'm going to start quickly, if you can just respond to this in a minute. In Benue State, the governor of Benue State, Samuel Ortom, came out, of course, after much speculation, to openly throw his weight behind the Labour Party presidential candidate, Peter Obi. Of course, Peter Obi, who was supposed to be a guest at the town hall meeting attended by stakeholders across the 276 council wards in Benue State, organized by the Inter-Party Advisory Council in support of Obi Dati's presidential ambition in Makurdi. He couldn't be physically present due to bad weather. But of course, Ortom went ahead and made a physical appearance at the gathering held at the Royal Choice Inn, during which he lauded the qualities of the Labour Party presidential candidate, whom he said was among the top 3 contenders and remained outstanding. Let's just get you in, Cheta. What are your thoughts on this? It seems then B5 later become 4. How do I say it now? The G5 seems to have been broken into 4 people instead of 5. What are your thoughts?
Was never a factor, really. It was a noise-making vehicle. It's when you consider the 5 governors who left the PDP back in 2014 and essentially broke the back of the PDP, and then look at them with and make comparisons with what we now call a G5. The difference in depth becomes very clear. Having said that, what Ortom has simply done is to is to show that he's actually quite aware of where his people want to be. Benue is one state that's in the report we'll publish later today. We are calling for Peter Obi. And Otom has looked at what is on the ground and decided that he wants to be right with his people, quote and unquote, when he leaves office, which is leaving in 101 days time. So that's not surprising at all. Whether Ikpeazu and Ugwuanyi have the self-awareness to do what Otom has done is another discussion entirely. In Seyi Makende's state, the sentiment is tilting towards Bola Tinubu. In Nyesom Wike's state, the sentiment is also tilting towards Peter Obi, but Nyesom Wike is, to use the colloquialism, is proving to be coconut-head and is trying to fight against the voice of the people, which never really ends well if the people are motivated enough.
Yeah. All right, we'll see how this turns out. But of course, the biggest story in Nigeria in the last 48 hours has to be the confusion between the Central Bank of Nigeria governor, the Supreme Court, and President Muhammadu Buhari. And of course, now we can throw in the governor of Kaduna State, El-Rufai, the governor of Kano State, Abdullahi Ganduje, and a couple of other people who have spoken for the first time openly against their president and the leader of their party. So now give us a breakdown of what you think is playing out here. Are these only happening? First of all, I'm not sure if you saw the interview with Professor Chidi Odinkalu, who was very, very vocal, on his thoughts.
I saw it.
Okay, brilliant.
I saw it. Professor Odinkalu is a mentor of sorts. And
so, Cheta, hold on. Just before you respond, let's play this clip for our viewers this morning. And this is the Kaduna State Governor, Malam Nasir El-Rufai. These are his thoughts on the Naira redesign and the Naira policy.
Stay calm and peaceful and support the lawful means being utilized to solve our problems. On behalf of the Kaduna State government, I wish to assure you that none of you would lose the money you have in old notes. Let no artificial or illegal deadline frighten you. Whether you live in towns, villages, or in our isolated rural communities, do not feel stampeded to deposit your old notes into the banks. Hold on to them. Continue to use them as legal tender as ordered by the Supreme Court of Nigeria. No deadline can render them worthless, ever. The law is on your side. The Central Bank of Nigeria Act 2007 in Section 20, subsection 3, and the Bills of Exchange Act both oblige the Central Bank of Nigeria to recognize your old notes and give you value in new notes.
Like he says, the law is on your side. Cheta Nwanze, let's hear you.
Yeah, I would lean on a lot of what Professor Odinkalu has said, and hands on hearts here. Professor Odinkalu is a mentor of sorts, so when he speaks, I tend to listen to it a lot to what he says. However, where I would have and it's a very tiny disagreement, is we are now in an uncomfortable situation where we are being forced to look at something that is wrong from all sides, and many of us appear to have to take a side. The Supreme Court should not be interfering in monetary policy. What do they know about monetary policy? And here, what Professor Odinkalu has said is very spot on. What the Supreme Court has been doing, not just on this particular issue, but on issues that it's been building up, has actually undermined its legitimacy. And if the Supreme Court is not legitimate, is not seen as legitimate, then you have anarchy. One of the key pillars that the federal government has to stand on is with respect to monetary policy. A state governor cannot come and go against federal monetary policy. And the CBN governor has, of course, clearly with the backing of the president, has stated where he wants to go. But, and this is where the paradox comes in, the undermining of the CBN is from all sides, including the president. The CBN is supposed to be independent and has to be seen as independent. But unfortunately, that ship has sailed.
Yes.
So I'm not even going to dwell on this. And it's easy for me to say, in quotes, I've been out of Nigeria for a few weeks. I'll be back pretty soon, so I'll come and join you guys in an ATM queue.
Okay.
But the ship has sailed, and we should be looking beyond that sailed ship right now at what the new president has to do, because the new president, whoever it is, has one of the first things that he has to do is to find a way to restore confidence in the CBN,
yes,
and in the Supreme Court.
Okay.
And
right.
that is, it's a lot of work, because trust is that kind of thing that once it's broken, to rebuild it takes more work than gaining it in the first place.
Absolutely. All right, Cheta Nwanze, in the interest of time, we'll have to wrap up here. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Always a pleasure speaking with you. And do come back. Hopefully, when you get back, the Naira queues have disappeared and there's some petrol. But of course, we'll look forward to
seeing you again. The Naira queues have disappeared on Monday.
We'll look forward to seeing you again.
All right.